In his new book, Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, a critique of the contemporary left, Ben Burgis explores how we, as a society, have gotten used to the notion that leftism consists of performative politics rather than looking to achieve working-class goals.
Fascinating point. Ben Burgis joins us now to discuss the book further. Thanks so much for joining us, Ben.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I want to start by asking about one person in particular, because they've sort of been at the cusp of all of this for years. I want to ask about what Sarah Silverman discusses a lot in her own podcast and sort of throughout the years. Sarah Silverman is somebody who looks back on her own work and says, as a committed leftist, I'm embarrassed by a lot of this. I did a lot of this wrong. But it's also sort of the process of progressing as a society. It's just sort of part of what happens, and you can be embarrassed, and that's still okay, but we have to sort of strike this balance between comedy being edgy and challenging, and comedy also as a cultural force having appropriate boundaries for how we talk about other people and what we laugh and what we joke about. What do you make of this sort of reckoning in the industry? It's sort of split right now. There are some people who are with Sarah, and some people are sort of very hardcore in the other direction. Even people on the left, saying we should not have boundaries. We should not think about these things. We should be decent people. Cat Williams had interesting comments on this the other week. But what do you make of the dynamic in the industry right now as it reckons with how to be a good sort of person while also being challenging as a comedian in this current climate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of the question is what comedy is for and what it's not for. So I think that, like, a lot of times, anybody who says absolutely nothing is ever off limits, I'm never offended by anything, is probably a little bit deluded about themselves. There probably are things that would offend them, realistically. But I think that the impact of the culture war on comedy tends to be very bad for comedy in both directions. The more people are worried about stuff like that, the less interesting it's going to be, certainly. And you end up getting this sort of insufferable woke pseudo comedy that's really more about inspiring clapping than laughter. And conversely, you get endless sort of hacky specials that start with even good ones that start with like 10 minutes of nobody can tell a joke anymore, sort of, the most predictable hacky stuff in the world that just gets really tedious to watch or listen to. But I guess that the bigger question that I would raise is, why do we care so much, right? In other words, like, when I see people criticizing the content of like a Dave Chappelle special as if Chappelle were running for a leadership position in DA, and this were his candidate statement, and everything was meant literally. I wonder what's going on there. And I think that it's the flip side of the reason that, during the Bush years, so many people were willing to follow Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert to Washington, D.C. To a rally, which is this kind of confusion about what comedy can do. I think it's a form of entertainment. At best, maybe it's at its very best, maybe it's a form of art, but it's certainly not a tool for social change. And I think it's just going to be extremely ineffective in that, like any form of art is going to be as a tool for social change. Like, actual social change involves, organizing the working class and doing things in the real world. And I think that when people get confused into thinking that comedy or some other art form is going to be a form of social change in itself, they end up with this really weird moralistic focus on what's going on there that doesn't really make sense in its own terms, and that really redefines politics in an unhelpful way, away from being about systems and structures to the moral evaluation of individuals. Is Bill Burr a good person?
So there's like an abstract effect that comedy can have, which is very much different than the immediate effect that other social change can have. And it's funny to see how we go from like Jesus is magic to Nanette. Bush era versus Trump era is completely different. But the arc is puzzling.
And looking for comedy and for art and for film as places to make social change makes sense if you feel like you're powerless to make any change through the political system. And it's like several generations of leftists have been taught that they are utterly powerless, that the most that they can do is perform their morality as a stage, on stage, or go to a Nader rally. And this is the most that you're going to be able to express your values, to the point where, with unified control of Washington, a lot of leftists still don't believe that they actually have any ability to influence the material well-being of the working class, and are, like, as we speak, ignoring a $6 trillion opportunity to kind of transform the economy, because that can't be real, because they've just grown up knowing that the system is so rigged, and they're so alienated from it, and they feel so powerless in it. And you write about this alienation and this powerlessness, and how that fuels this what was call-out culture and now is called cancel culture, and drives people to try to, I don't know what they're trying to do, actually. You bring up the Barbara Ehrenreich tweet as one interesting example. So tell us a little bit about the momentary Ehrenreich cancellation as a metaphor for this phenomenon more broadly.
Yeah, so Barbara Ehrenreich is somebody who was involved in the peace movement, the women's movement, other social movements going back to the 1970s. She helped to found the Democratic Socialists of America. She most famously wrote a book called Nickel and Dimed, about how hard it is to make a living on minimum wage work. And so this is somebody with like really deep left commitments. And she tweeted out, a couple of years ago during the height of the Marie Kondo phenomenon, she tweeted something about how, aesthetically, instinctively, she's on the side of clutter anyway. But she said that she thought it said something about the decline of the United States as an imperial power, that so many people were now willing to watch this show with subtitles, that Kondo wasn't doing in English. And if you never knew who Barbara Ehrenreich was, if this was your first experience of her, then, okay, it's a tweet, it's 280 characters. I could understand reading that and thinking, oh, this is some sort of xenophobic, everybody should speak English, darn it, comment. And that's her point here. But if you know that she has been criticizing U.S. imperialism since Richard Nixon was president, you probably think that, like, she doesn't think that the decline of America as an imperial power is a bad thing. But this was.
And Ben, before you move on to her cancellation over this, I want to underline this point here. She was actually making kind of an interesting point, which was that American imperialism appears to be in decline, and her evidence of it was that there were so many Americans who were less xenophobic and were willing to watch a foreign language person with subtitles, and that wouldn't have been the case in a more xenophobic time like the 1980s or 1990s. So she was actually celebrating it as a good thing that this was happening. And so then, Ben, what ends up happening?
Yeah, no, exactly right. And despite this, despite the fact that was the context, this was greeted by a massive pile-on that certainly included hundreds or thousands of people tweeting about this terrible racist thing that she tweeted, and even made it. I think there's an article in Newsweek that just casually referred to Barbara Ehrenreich's racist tweets. Gosh. And the thing that got me about this is that surely, like, the people who first saw this tweet and started reacting to it were people who followed Barbara Ehrenreich on Twitter. They had some idea of who she was, but all of the feedback mechanisms that are built into to social media platforms really reward this kind of instant reaction that you just react to things immediately, get that little dopamine rush of likes and retweets. The companies that own these have the same incentives that Marlboro does to make their product as addictive as at all possible. Put that together with the fact that we live in a society where people are incredibly atomized. Some people feel most connected to others online. And I think that you get this as a broader phenomenon. And then I think the left is particularly susceptible to it because of what Ryan was talking about earlier, that when you don't feel like you have the power to change the real world, if you can at least have this cathartic feeling of yelling at the bad people and exerting, so-called accountability, that feels like something.
Yeah, and this is where I think my central disagreement with this premise comes to a head because, and maybe it's not really even a disagreement, but I think this is very much a function of decadence, and it's a top-down way for powerful people to shield themselves and protect themselves from power by just sort of like fomenting these culture wars and then keeping everybody else busy with that and preoccupied with that while, as you say, Ben, the world burns. I guess I just see this very much of, like, it's not so much that we feel powerless, is that there's this class of elites that feels so powerful that they want to exert their social control. I mean, people like Taylor Lorenz is just such a great example. Here you have this, New York Times reporter who's out policing speech and policing rhetoric, and I think that she genuinely believes that she's on a mission to do good in the world and that she's genuinely, actually doing all of this for the greater good, and she's genuinely helping working people, which she sometimes pays lip service to on her ridiculous Twitter feed. I see it so much as a function of decadence and power. And
although I don't know if we can count Taylor on the left.
No, I agree. That's my point. It's that sort of like the left gets I do agree that the left is there is a segment of the left that is attracted to using these mechanisms and can be sort of led in those directions. But ultimately, this is totally a top-down. It's an extension of a top-down power grab to distance people from real power.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some truth to that. I think that it's certainly the case that never-ending culture war is very good for people who do have power. And by the way, to say that, we don't need to think that there are like 10 guys in top hats sitting in a room, trying
Monopoly man.
To shift the discourse. It just has to be something that nobody particularly has an incentive to stop doing, because it's good for them. And I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I think if I think that there is a reason why neoliberal centrists in the Democratic Party love culture war so much, and conversely, there's a reason why, like CPAC last time was America Uncanceled, not like America Don't Raise the Minimum Wage or America Don't Healthcare. So I think that's true, but I also think that it's true that a lot of people who really don't have any power are very end up being very attracted to this and end up getting way too excited about consequences and accountability as sort of enforced by online mob. Precisely because it is the only way they can change the world, and the fact that it doesn't really threaten the interests of people with power, the fact, if anything, that it actually reinforces, what is in their interests. I think actually reinforces the point. I think both are true.
Well, Ben, we hope you yourself come out of this uncanceled. Thank you so much for joining us here on Rising.
All right, thank you so much, Ryan.
Appreciate it. Well, we'll be back with more Rising after this.